I'd like to welcome John Walkup. Number one, I love your name. For somebody who's involved in real estate, I mean, it's fantastic. I thought maybe
Right.
it was a
I,
pseudonym.
well, I like to joke that it's spelled Walkup, but it's pronounced penthouse. But yeah,
There you go. No, that's fantastic. So you're a fintech, prop tech entrepreneur,
yes, yes, and with UrbanDigs Analytics right now.
right? Oh, I forgot to mention that. So how did you get involved? What brought you to the opportunity that you saw in doing what you're doing with Urban Digs, which is
Well,
basically
it's actually kind of a fun story. So I have a background in trading. That was my first job, sort of out of graduate school. I was on a trading desk, and I did that for quite a while. And the writing was sort of on the wall that I mean, the stress was just was really getting up there. So I thought, well, you know what? I'd like to start seeing what else is out there. And at the same time, I was buying an apartment in New York City. And the broker I was using on the buy side was a guy named Noah Rosenblatt. And I liked him because he had this sort of data centric approach. And when we would go in and we'd look at apartments and be like, well, why is the price, exactly $1 million? Or why is the price $1.5 million? Like, where does it come from? He's like, that's exactly my point. That's exactly what I'm trying to solve. And at that time, he was trying to get this site called Urban Digs up and running. It was a blog. I had this background in applying data to problems. And I said, "Hey, listen, this is actually really interesting. I'd love to join you with this project." And I think finally in 2012 we joined forces and created Urban Digs Analytics, and here we are.
that's fantastic. I mean, that's a chance meeting, and that's the way things happen. But I love the fact that you were an algorithmic equity trader because I was an equity trader as well. Only back in the 80s, we didn't have email, let alone algorithms. So it was a definitely. Well, I started actually as a bond trader, but definitely a different bag. So now the algorithm, you develop it yourself.
On the trading side,
Yeah,
yeah, I did. So I was with a group and we were actually doing pure arbitrage for a while. And it was great. It was like manna from heaven for a while until you start ending the day with like large positions in stocks, which you're not supposed to have because it's supposed to be in out, at the same time. And at the end of the
right.
day, you're like, why am I holding all these positions? So it in the end, it became a lot more of a tech company than an actual trading firm. And we were trying to figure out, how to optimize equations and all of these different, pre-trade parameters in order to get our execution speed faster and faster and faster. And short of co-locating and shortening the actual distance between us and the data center, there was not much else we could do. We'd sort of reached that
Right.
point. And so all of us sort of took, individual side projects we had been working on and kind of just decided, you know what, we had a great run. Let's shelve this technology company because we couldn't participate. We couldn't play with some of the big boys out there who were just thinking this is like just before all the flash boys, all that sort of lightning
Right.
trading started. So we were right at that precipice. And so I took a lot of the strategies that I had been working on, which are a little less time dependent, and I had put those to work for several years. And then, at the end of the day, I'm married, I'm two kids, and it's like, watching your portfolio value fluctuate intraday,
I know.
it starts weighing on you. So it's like maybe I'd like to find something a little bit more stability so I could sleep at night and and
I
not die
agree.
of a heart attack at age 30. So
Did
that's
you ever hear
where
of
I
a
was.
company, Schoenfeld Securities?
Yeah, so I actually started at Heartland. Heartland was actually bought by Schoenfeld Securities. That was back in, oh gosh, like 2000, 2001
Yeah, well,
maybe.
I
So,
was I was Steve's one of his first traders.
oh
I used
wow, okay.
I
Okay,
sat
great.
at a trading table with Steve in Great Neck in the early days, and that's when you called the floor to transact. I mean, it was a whole nother world. But we're here to talk about real estate. Although I could
Yeah.
talk about equity trading all
Yeah.
day, I woke up every day and couldn't wait to get to work. But anyway, so you have one of your I don't know if it's a tagline, but new ideas, bold strategies, and the courage to implement them. I think that's a fantastic tagline. And is that you developed that over time, or was that something early on that really drove you, or it's an inherent driver in you?
No, I really like thinking about problems. I really like trying to, pretty much every industry that you go in, there's always a set of existing problems that are pretty much intractable. And I love just like thinking about them. And I love just like walking around and like, trying to crunch some of these problems and understand, well, where did the problem come from? What are the sort of the parameters that would define a success, and how would you be able to get there? And then there's some that just I just don't understand. A lot of those have to do sort of on the domestic side, like congestion and the sort of things that living in cities or living in a democracy, the sort of problems that those present. A lot of those are very, very difficult problems, and sometimes the solutions seem short term and are actually just totally unobtainable. But on the business side, sometimes it's interesting. And this is one of the things I loved about trading, is that when you had an idea, you could implement it that day or the next day, and you would immediately see, right? Was I right or was I wrong? And if I'm right, fantastic. Let's see if we can get it big. If I'm wrong, wow, that either really hurt, or at least I had my risk management set up, so it didn't cost me too much. And when I got involved with Noah and we started doing UrbanDigs, I'm looking around at the real estate industry, which I was a real neophyte to. And so one of the things I did is I went out and I got my real estate license, and I sat in the course, and I got my salesman license, and I went out with Noah and we represented buyers, and we did a bunch of transactions on the buy side. And I started viewing real estate, the purchase process, not just from a purchaser's point of view, but from a agent's point of view, from a brokerage point of view, and trying to understand, all right, well, there's a lot of different pieces here. Instead of just, finding the property, getting a price, and then moving on, there's all the work that kind of goes into the brokerage side of it, right, the agent side of it, the management of the expectations of the consumer. And they're all these pieces, and they all sort of like look like they fit together, but sometimes the edges don't quite line up. And, we did a lot of thinking around that. And our whole site is sort of orients itself around what we like to call, we like to call it now AI, UrbanDigs AI, which we like to say is agent intelligence. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that there's so many variables out there, and it's really difficult to master all of them.
So
we made a decision. Let's not focus on the things that we are not great at. This is, by the way, I'm talking like geologic timescales, right? This is like 10 years collapsed into like 20 seconds here. We had tried all kinds of things, and we finally said, you know what, we're really good at data, we're really good at pricing, we're really good at understanding market sentiment. Let's concentrate our efforts there. And then once we started really digging into those things, we started uncovering ratios and uncovering ways to look at the market that we don't think had really been done before or hadn't been done well. And we were able to kind of break apart the Manhattan and Brooklyn markets, which is sort of where we started. We're hoping to get bigger. We were able to break those apart and start looking at these markets on a much more hyper local scale to really understand, all right, well, what's driving the Yorkville 2-bed co-op market versus, say, the Tribeca high-rise, luxury market. And, those sort of insights have proven really powerful. And it's something that, like trading, you try it and it succeeds and immediately. It was sort of like that with UrbanDigs. Like we started putting out a lot of content, started doing, classes and seminars and stuff. And the response was, instantaneous. People loved it. It's like, oh, okay, these are stories that haven't been told, and people are hungry for these. So it's been an interesting journey that way.
That's phenomenal. So does UrbanDigs drive business to you on the real estate agent side?
No, we don't transact anymore.
You
We
don't.
made the decision to stop transacting probably about 10 years ago now, and
Okay.
focus full time on the data. So for me, that was very helpful to sort of get that, drink from the fire hose and sort of understand the business from the ground up. Um, but at the same time, we don't want to ever appear as competition for
Right.
our clients. So we don't
Classic
transact.
conflict of interest.
Right.
We have that in the title insurance business all the time. But so I had a guest on my podcast probably like a year ago in the commercial real estate space. Bob Knackel, you
Yeah,
know
of
that
course.
name? Yeah.
Of course.
So and it's similar to you, only he's commercial, you're residential. He he prides himself on knowing everything about everything, so
Yeah.
that he's in a position.
He's also Bob Knackel.
Oh yeah,
And I'm
but I don't know if you've ever been. So he has this thing called the map room,
right.
and it's basically a schematic of every neighborhood, every building, everything, and it's not. So I just think it's somewhat similar to you. You try and analyze, why in Yorkville two-bedroom co-ops or condos are going for X versus, you know, three avenues over, which is, I mean, your algorithms must be phenomenal. But he does similar things, but on a, you know, construction, on accumulating properties, similar, different property types. But, again, he's all about information, and so are you. I think it's incredible.
I mean, he's first of all, the man's is a legend and he's a machine. And we had him on a Talking Manhattan one time, and one of the things that we like to ask guests when we do our podcast Talking Manhattan is like, what's the advice you have? What makes you successful? What would you suggest other people do? And Bob Knackles, I mean, his whole thing is like, stop trying to be a master of trades. Like, don't try to master everything, but be a specialist. Know something and know it cold. Like, you got to know every single building, every single unit in the building. Like, you need to know, you don't need to know everyone, but you need to know some specific niche of this market and just completely own it.
Right.
And of course, the way he describes that and the way he talks about it is fantastic, because he lives it. And when he
Oh,
talks about it, like, oh yeah, great. But what's interesting is we do ask, because we ask this question so many times, what sort of advice do you have to new agents? And after hearing Bob Knackle kind of talk about it, I started listening to that. So, oh, that's great. And I realized that most everybody else has that same sort of thought. It really resonated across a broad swath of the professional agent community, which is like, oh yeah, I specialize in this, or this is my sector. And they talk about it in different ways, but at the core of every successful broker we've ever talked to, there's always this immense body of knowledge, which a lot of it is gained from just studying and staying on top of news and staying on top of what's happening in the world. But I would say 80% of it is just, I mean, it's boot leather. It is on the ground, in the hallways, in the buildings, right in the elevators, talking to the doorman, and just experiencing the real estate from the ground up. And it's irreplaceable. And that's, I think, also to the core of what Bob was talking about. And that's, really what we can support that. But I mean, that's a lot of that's just on you.
right. So do you think most real estate agents on the residential side do that footwork? Do they do the hard work? Do the research?
It's interesting, when I first got in this business, from the outside, right? I think I shared the same view most people have of real estate agents when you get in, which is, I had been a long time renter in the city, and it was just like, what am I paying for? What is this? Where's this commission going? What's the?
Right.
I just didn't get it. But working on the buy side, just working as a buy side broker, I mean, there is actually a lot of work involved, and I don't think people quite realize, what happens under the surface. I mean, it's an amazing amount of work, and on the sell side too. Like, besides the transaction itself, there's a whole sphere of activity around it, just to support
Yes.
you and your decision, that you just never see. And I think there are some people that get in the business that don't quite realize that.
Right.
And I think that's a very hard realization for them. And, maybe they stay, maybe they don't. But I think there are some people who get into this business with an eye towards sales and an eye toward the uncapped opportunity that this represents. And they're like, I'm all for it. And they sort of have that personality and that drive to make it work for them. And when you meet those people, you realize, I mean, they are a separate class. And it has nothing to do with, like, it's not like an Ivy League thing. It's not a class thing. It's not there's nothing sort of that you could be born with or
It's
just
an
be
innate thing.
to. It's something that it comes from within. And it's just
Yeah,
amazing to
definitely.
see, like, the class of people that have it. It's a wide, and it's an amazing group of people to meet and interact with on a daily basis.
Well, so this is going to sound maybe a little disparaging, and maybe it's not politically correct, or any number of things, probably. But when I was looking for a house in 1994, we had agents who on Long Island. We were looking on Long Island, and I think the derogatory term is they were housewives. They weren't really professional agents, as opposed to, I'm in
Yeah.
a networking group in the city with a guy, and actually this week he did his presentation, and he was talking about what goes into the buying process, especially in a co-op. And we're going to get into that in a second, because I know you're a world famous Wall Street Journal quoted uh, expert.
Right.
But but you know you have to school them on how to put a package together. You have to school them on how to leave things out, what to put in, income things where, maybe they don't qualify, but the wife can do this, and then, how to speak in front of the board. What you need. Yeah, it's a big process, and I
It
know
is.
that you do need a professional.
Yeah, you do. I mean, look, I mean, the licensing requirements, I mean, it's not that difficult. I mean, it does take a little bit of effort, but it really is open to everybody. And that really is part of the beauty of it, is this industry is so open, and it does allow folks that, I mean, yes, that low standard to entry, that low sort of barrier to entry, I should say, can bring out the worst in some people, can bring out some of the hucksterism. That's totally true. But there is that class of people again that they are on top of their game, and they live it, they breathe it, and they love it, and it makes an amazing difference in
Oh
the
yeah.
the quality of a transaction. It's just so much easier with somebody who A, likes it, and B, lives it. I mean, it's an amazing difference. So yeah.
So I had on my podcast once a woman, Luciani Sarifovic. I don't know if you know her, but
Yes, we do. I think my partner Noah is pretty good friends with her. I've
oh, is that
met her
right?
before, but I'm not as familiar with as he
Oh,
is.
okay. Well, she's great, but she's focused.
Yeah.
She wakes up and lives and breathes real estate, and that's a beautiful thing, and that's fantastic. So now, just getting into the co-op versus condo. I know that what is it, 80% of apartments in Manhattan and Brooklyn are co-op, or is it mostly Brooklyn that's mostly co-op?
Everything's still mostly co-op. I think, obviously no one's making co-ops anymore, so that number is slowly decreasing every year as
Right.
more and more new condos come online. I think in Manhattan we're probably, I would say, in like the 60 to 70% range. So definitely still more co-ops, but again, I mean, it's only a matter of time before condos, take the lead.
Overtake. You know what, from my personal perspective, and this sounds, you know, bad, but I love condos. I really don't like co-ops. But it's a title insurance thing.
Right.
But
Okay.
but anyway, so in the Wall Street Journal, you were quoted exactly 5 times, and you were talking about the disparity and how it arose, where it's going, and changes that are happening. So I found one part interesting where co-op boards are finally getting the clue that they need to loosen their standards some.
Right.
Not standards, but the process. People are terrified when it's time to go in front of a co-op board.
Yeah, I think there's so much that goes into it, especially, I mean, obviously not all co-ops fall into this bucket, but there are some co-ops which sort of may have seen themselves as sort of gatekeepers in a larger sort of grand society sense, in which case they want, the right sort of people to be in the building. And,
Right.
okay, let's put race aside for the moment. That may have been a factor way back when, but now it's sort of an income thing, a class thing, which is, all right, well, let's say it's an $8 million apartment or a $10 million apartment. They don't want to see financing, number one. They want to see multiple times of that apartment price in cash, in liquid assets, basically after the purchase. So they're setting such high hurdles that buyer pool is already small. And then you sort of factor on top the idea that buyers are more and more not necessarily willing to go through that process, and don't necessarily feel a need to prove themselves or go through that process. So that buyer pool is shrinking even more. So I think a lot of co-ops are starting to back off of maybe they'll keep some of those high finance requirements because they do want to sort of protect the co-op. But there were so many things in a lot of these old co-ops that just in modern buyers make no sense. I think one of the most egregious is the so-called summer work rules. So if you bought something and you wanted to do a gut renovation, you could only do it from, say, mid-June to, the end of August, from, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays, which is great. It keeps the building quiet during this, the season when people are there in the winter. But, if you're doing an 8-room or 10-room co-op, I mean, you're looking at years of work. I mean, it's
Oh,
massive amounts of hassle. Whereas, if you're sinking that same money into a new developed condo, you don't need to lift a finger. You can move right in and you don't have that problem. So yeah, I think co-ops are slowly facing this sort of generational crisis in which, at least not all of them, but some of them certainly are, where their outdated um, membership rules, so to speak, are meeting a crowd who's just not interested in having a club that wants them as a member, kind of thing.
right. Their rules are meeting reality.
Right.
which makes sense. So do you think the price spread, the cost spread is ever going to narrow? Like from your research, what's the narrowest in, and I know it's going to vary from neighborhood to neighborhood, building to building, but in general, what's the spread typically between like co-ops and condos?
Typically it's about 20% premium for a condo. And I, to your point, it's not really location dependent. I mean, obviously that does factor in, but it does sort of scale with different areas and different property types. But I think part of it is the hassle, and I think the other part is just because condos are actually real property. You can just
Right.
there's that sense of freedom. Like, oh, do you want to rent it out? It's yours. You can do with it what you want. So a lot of times, to be honest and to be fair to co-ops, sometimes the condo rules can be just as excessive, right? They also do have home ownership associations inside the condo, and there are rules sometimes associated with them that can drive people crazy. That's true, but for the most part, a condo is real property. It makes estate planning easier. It makes, the purchase process in terms of what you own easier, even if it is expensive. So people do tend to prefer that.
Right. So do you know a woman, Tina Larson, who partnered with the Folsom Group?
Yes, I have spoken with Tina. We were hoping to have her on. I don't think it ever clicked, but we're hoping to get her back on. Hopefully, maybe this year, next year, something like that.
She's great, but she deal. Listen, the boards are comprised of neophytes who just live in the building and got elected to the board. But in New York City, in these residential buildings, there's so much. These local laws are beyond the pale,
Yeah.
and how you manage them is I don't know how you manage them
Well,
alone.
it's a great point. So I'm on the board of my co-op, and it's made up. I wouldn't say we're neophytes. I mean, some of us have been on the board
Right,
for years, and these are very accomplished people,
100%.
super smart people that I'm like honored to be with. But the key and the sort of unsung hero in most of these is a really diligent managing agent who's able to keep track of, hey, guess what? There's another 35 local laws you have to comply with, and you got to do
It's
this. I mean, it's a
unbelievable.
never ending stream of stuff, which if you don't have a competent managing
Oh,
agent, or you're
yeah,
sort of a self-managed building,
you're screwed.
you're screwed. That's a lot of work. And especially to your point, like, this is not my day, being on the co-op board is not my day job. So even
But
if it was,
also,
it's a lot.
to your point, I have no question that a lot of boards are comprised of very smart people, leaders in their field, titans of industry. But when, and you're the exception, a lot of people really don't know the city. They don't know real estate beyond the fact that they're in the building and own an apartment. And the fact that they're that smart and that accomplished, that can sometimes be an impediment because you have a board that could potentially be comprised of everyone who's the leader in their own realm. And how do things get done?
Yeah, if you're looking for common sense answers to government problems, you're it's not
Oof.
going to work out well.
You know what? It's really incredible. Yeah, I opine quite a bit about politics and government, and the fact that you have people who've probably never been in the private sector dictating to the private sector, not understanding unintended consequences, like in the 2019 rental law. You know, I think it's a problem.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's certain blurry, but there's certain things I like. I'll be honest. So, right now, if I want to throw something away, I've got three choices. Like, I either go into the sink and just the garbage, or it's recycling, or now it's compost, right? So
Oh, I didn't
there's
even know.
there's all this thing, right? So it's the buildings have to do with the composting. And at first I was like, just yet another thing. I got but our building, because our super was sort of forward thinking on this. He went out and he bought a big freezer, like one of these big, suburbia sized. I go to Costco once a week and I buy my T-bone kind of stick freezer. So everyone puts their compost in there. But I realized a couple of weeks ago, like, I actually really like it because all the recycling goes into the haul bins, and I do that on a daily basis. I take my compost out, maybe, I have a little thing for it, but it keeps the trash under my sink. I don't have to empty it. I used to empty it every day just because I don't like that smell. It doesn't smell anymore. All it is just
Great.
like, plastic wraps and saran wrap, or, pieces of that. But there's nothing in there that smells. And it's I mean, I could talk extensively about garbage and
You
compost
seem
because
to be
it's been
really
amazing to me.
interested in it.
But
That you could.
it's a really kind of cool thing. Like I never thought, hey, I'd like compost, but it's like, you know what? This is actually pretty good. So,
So
kudos to them for that.
what do
So
they
just
do?
like bike lanes, don't get me started on bike lanes because I
Oh,
love them,
forget
but
about it.
I don't want to pull anybody's set
I
anybody's trigger here.
I don't know how more people don't get hit and hurt, between the cars and you step off the curb and if you don't look in the right direction or you're gonna get killed. So
Yeah,
you're a
I've had
you're a
far more
supporter.
close calls with cars than I have with bikes. And if I'm gonna get hit by one, I'd pick a bike. But man,
I don't know. I don't know. I think either one is going to do a lot of damage. So
yeah, I think we gotta figure this out because I
I
feel
think
like
we
there's so
got
much. Ah, don't get
100%.
me started.
But we're not going to figure out all of New York's problems
No,
right now.
I'm
We can
telling you,
try.
these are the intractable problems that I like to walk around thinking about that I know there's really no good solution for. You see,
You know what?
coming back.
Uh, you know, so here's a question for you. I was actually talking to somebody about it yesterday, and the statement was that New York City always comes back. 1987, the market crashed, the tech wreck in the late 90s, 2001, obviously, the 2008 financial crisis, and it always comes back. I mean, do you think, the old rule of thumb is that you can't make more land in New York City, and New York City is New York City? Do you think that's always going to be the case?
It's not something I would bet on. I think it kind of depends on your timeline. There's a site Zero Hedge. Zero Hedge. You ever read Zero
Sure,
Hedge? These
sure,
kind
sure.
of things. So on a timeline, everything goes to
Right,
zero,
right,
right?
right.
It's just like long enough timeline, right? Everything sort of fails. So I really think it's a question of scale. And you look at some of the New York bounce backs that we've seen, and there have been some periods of troughs, right? If you look at New York City in the 70s, like it kind of started
Oh,
recovering
man.
maybe in the early 80s, but it wasn't a great recovery. It wasn't really until the end of the 80s, maybe the early 90s, mid 90s even, that you would say, oh wow, New York's it's come a long way. So that's a long stretch. So if you just happen to be in that stretch from say 1976 to 1982, you might not have felt like the city bounced back,
Coming
and
back.
that's a 6 year thing. So now we're on a scale like we saw a real market peak in terms of real estate activity and buying frenzy, 2015 to 2017. And so we're about 8 years past that now, and we saw a brief glimpse of almost a return of that from 21 into early 22 before the Fed started, raising rates and mortgage rates started going up. Um, but we really haven't recaptured that, and that sort of environment in which you put anything on the market and it's just snapped up instantly, that hasn't really come back. So yes, we've seen some deal value, we've seen some market, some deal volume increasing, we've seen buyers sort of slowly come back to the market, but it's nothing like it was back then. So
I agree.
I do think that New York City does have a tendency to recover, like most things. I'm looking, even Detroit is making a recovery, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
amazing.
been a long time coming,
Oh, yeah.
right? But it's coming back. So I think cities have a long and mostly good history in terms of human evolution. People tend to like to be together, and live together and grow these things. But it's always something new, right? So now we're post COVID. We're in this idea that maybe telecommuting is here to stay, even though people are starting to get forced to go back to the work.
Right.
AI is out there, so we have all these other forces sort of competing for our attention and competing for our living area. But look, I moved to New York City as a graduate student, and it's the kind of place I flew into Newark. I had a suitcase, took the path, and I came up in Greenwich Village, and I was like, oh my god, I love this place. And it's the sort of the history of that is, I'd fly back. I grew up in Texas, so I'd fly back, visit my folks, come back in, and be taking the taxi, and you crossing over like the 59th Street Bridge, and you see the skyline ahead of you, and you feel energized, like, yeah, I love it. So glad to be back. Fast forward 10 years, and you're making that same trip, and you see that skyline, you're like, oh my God, can't, I
Yeah.
just can't. But
Well,
it's
it,
I
it,
love the city. I think there's so much. I love the dynamism. I love the fact that I can walk down a block and see 100 people, and I feel like I've already had a social interaction, even though I haven't spoken to anybody. Like, there's something energizing about the city that I love. It's
yes.
it's obviously not for everybody, but I do think there is a certain contagiousness to that will sort of bring people back eventually.
Agreed, but here's my last question.
Okay.
And then we have to go, but quality of life issues. I don't know in your research, in the metrics you use, if you can even factor that in. The decline to an extent of quality of life. I lived on the Upper East Side for 10 years, and I would never have any issue with walking anywhere at any time. Certainly there were parts of the city that you couldn't do that in, but the Upper East Side, I mean, now when I'm in the city, you got to have your head on a swivel. You got to keep, you got to watch your back. And I don't know if that lasts or what, but is that a factor that can't be I guess you can't put a number on it, but how big an impact do you think quality of life issues and cost of living issues are going to have?
I think they're actually huge. And, I think crime, and that sort of visceral understanding of being in danger, I think that's the kind of thing that keeps people from buying in the city, or buying when they're, or renting, I suppose, when they're a young professional, and then moving out and not wanting to raise a family. You're not wanting to be in the city when there's other people that are under their care that could be in harm's way. And I get it. I do. And I don't think that's something to dismiss. But to me, the bigger aspect of quality of life issues is garbage on the street, trash on the street, uh,
Homeless in
crowded.
the street.
Yeah, and crowded, congestion, not being able to get where you need to go, like the things that make living in the city really annoying, that you interact with on a daily basis, that are just, you just want to throw up your hands and be like, that's it, I'm out. I want to buy my Suburban. I want to drive to a
Yeah.
strip mall, call
Or
it
if
a day,
if
because
you're walking down
it's
the
great.
street with your kids and it's just permeated with pot, now
Yeah, that's
how
another
do you
thing. Like,
explain that to your
it used to be
kids?
like you would smell pot, and you'd be like, wow, oh, somebody's smoking pot. That's
Right.
and now it's kind of like, oh yeah, here we go again. But
Someone's getting high.
I'm less concerned about that, because I feel like it's just this wave. It's been decriminalized. All right, get it out of your system, whatever. Like, okay, I think we'll be okay, right? They have it in Amsterdam, but all right, it's Amsterdam, okay.
Right.
Um, but I feel like, to me, it's, as long as I feel like this, as long as the city is addressing these things, is taking steps to sort of mitigate them, I feel like we're going in the right direction. So
Okay.
I do get the sense that quality of life is an issue with buyers, especially, but I haven't yet seen it creep into the data. It's one of these things that, like, it's really hard to measure. And
Oh yeah. No
I mean,
question.
even mortgage rates are hard to measure. You look at the correlation of mortgage rates to deal volume, and you think, oh, it's a 1-to-1. It's not. It's like the correlation coefficient's like 0.28. It's like, okay, there's definitely some value there, but it's nothing that I would want to bet on. It's like, there's so many cash deals. There's so many people who have different, you know,
Oh yeah.
ways, means
Reasons
that it,
and yeah, of
yeah. So
course.
it's an interesting thing. And I think quality of life is actually really, really huge. I'm more concerned about the annoying things. But yes, crime is an issue, especially in some of the more popular residential areas like Upper West, Upper East Sides. Like, I think if crime starts seeping in there in a way that people, buyers, just back off, yeah, I think you could see a real hit to prices. And again, that's not something you can model out. It's just like, oh, buyers have left. Like, it's
Right.
not a 5% hit. You're
Right.
talking like 15-20% hit kind of thing.
Time on the market goes from 150 days to 900 days.
Right. And so this is another interesting thing. So when you look at crises in the city, and you look at, say, the credit crisis, the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, usually what happens when the real estate market goes into a crisis mode, it's, yes, prices go down, right? We saw condo prices go down about 30%. But what was really interesting is the off market number just spiked up. Sellers are like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to sell into this. I'm just going to leave the market. So this, usually every time you get a little bit of economic worries or something like that, when you get the real estate market shaky, off market spikes up. The problem with quality of life issues impacting real estate is that sellers are going to want to sell. And that's when things get really, really spooky. So you start seeing this massive inventory spike because people are like, I want out, and
I get
buyers are nowhere to be found. That's when you have real problems. And that's not something, rate cuts are going to cure. So
no.
that's something to watch out for.
Well, you know, we'll see what happens, I guess is the best we can do right now. But I would love to have you back in a year to reevaluate where we're at.
Yes. I hope we look back and be like, wow,
Wow, it
2025
was
was so
great.
great. Right.
And usually at this point, the outro plays. But now I'm going to have to
Okay.
sing myself because for some reason it wasn't working. So, John, it was great to have you on. And that's it.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Listen, you take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. I know there's a little wonky to get started, but I'm glad we did it,
Yeah,
and hope we can
all
do it
good, my
again.
friend. I will speak
Very
to you
cool.
soon.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you.